Every generation thinks it understands money until the rules change. But what if the greatest financial revolution of all time isn't coming? Because we're already living inside it? What if the way our world borrows, spends, and creates money is not a system of stability, but the largest experiment ever attempted, one whose ending no one can predict? This is the story of how debt became the oxygen of modern civilization, and why that oxygen might one day ignite. We are living through the most ambitious financial experiment in human history, and most people have no idea they're part of it. Across the planet, debt in every form, public, private, corporate, household, has ballooned to levels no empire or kingdom ever dared to carry. Governments now borrow trillions with a few signatures. Central banks summon new money out of nothing but code and confidence. Families sign 30-year mortgages as casually as adding groceries to a cart. And yet, society keeps pretending that debt is normal, harmless, even permanent. But the truth is far more uncomfortable. Debt has never been neutral. It has always been a tool of control, a symbol of power, and a fuse waiting for the spark. The question isn't if today's mountain of global debt will collapse, but when and who will be standing when the dust settles. To see how we arrived here, we have to dig back to the birth of civilization itself. Debt is as ancient as writing. The earliest clay tablets of Mesopotamia weren't filled with poetry or prayer, but with records, who owed whom, how much grain, how many cattle. In those early worlds, debt was sacred. Priests and kings didn't just collect it, they managed it, sometimes even erased it in great jubilees, to keep their societies from breaking apart. Imagine that, an era when survival required a financial reset, when forgiveness was an act of economic necessity. Those rulers understood what many modern leaders have forgotten. You cannot chain an entire population with obligations forever. Sooner or later, every system overloaded with debt begins to crack. Leap forward to the Renaissance, when debt evolved from fields and livestock into gold and credit. The banking dynasties of Florence, the Medici and their rivals, lent to kings and popes alike. Their loans financed wars, cathedrals, and entire empires. But even then, debt was double-edged. Spain, rich with silver from the New World, went bankrupt 4 times in the 1500s because its crown borrowed beyond reason. And that was the first great lesson of modern finance. Even empires dripping with gold can drown in their own ambition. By the 20th century, debt was no longer personal, it was geopolitical. After World War I, nations were buried under obligations so vast they seemed impossible to repay. Germany's war reparations under the Treaty of Versailles were so crushing that economists warned they'd tear the country apart. They were right. The hyperinflation of the 1920s, when wheelbarrows of paper marks could barely buy a loaf of bread, was born from debts that couldn't be paid in reality. Those scars shaped the rage that would ignite another world war. Debt wasn't just an accounting error anymore, it was the fuel of collapse. Then came 1944. At the Bretton Woods Conference, the blueprint for the modern financial world was drawn. The United States, sitting on 2/3 of the planet's gold, became the new anchor. The dollar would be tied to gold at $35 an ounce. Every other currency would tie itself to the dollar. The goal was stability. The result was dependency. The entire global economy was now built on trust in one nation's discipline. And for a while it held. But temptation never sleeps. By the 1960s, as Vietnam and domestic spending surged, the US printed more dollars than it had gold to back. Foreign governments began demanding gold in return for paper. So in 1971, President Nixon closed the window, severing the dollar from gold. That quiet act changed everything. From that moment, debt was free, no longer anchored to anything tangible. Governments could borrow and print at will, restrained only by belief. The world entered an era where money itself became elastic. Central banks learned they could manipulate interest rates to guide entire economies. When growth slowed, they cut rates to encourage borrowing. When crisis struck, they issued even more debt to patch the wounds. Each fix required more leverage than the last. The 1980s brought vast public borrowing under Reagan and Thatcher, justified as defense and reform. Developing nations joined the frenzy, taking on loans they could never repay, leading to the Latin American debt crisis. The pattern was locked in. Debt created the illusion of prosperity until the bill arrived. Fast forward to 2008. The global financial crisis wasn't simply about housing. It was about a world addicted to leverage, a pyramid built on debt stacked upon debt. Mortgages became securities, securities became derivatives, and banks amplified it all 30-fold. When one piece fell, the entire tower shuddered. The result? Collapsed banks, shattered pensions, and governments forced to print trillions to rescue the same institutions that caused the disaster. The cruel irony? The reckless were saved. The responsible were left jobless, homeless, and disillusioned. Debt revealed itself not as a neutral system, but as an engine built to protect the powerful. And since that reckoning, the numbers have only become surreal. In just 2 decades, global debt has tripled, surpassing $300 trillion by 2023. That's nearly 4 times the size of the global economy itself. Governments, corporations, and households all joined the race. Japan's public debt has soared past 200% of GDP. The United States adds trillions every year with barely a debate. We are running an experiment with no precedent and no exit plan. The question haunting economists today is the same one whispered by kings thousands of years ago. How long can a society survive when its wealth is built on promises it can never keep? The global economy today rests on an illusion so vast that it feels real. Emerging nations borrow in foreign currencies they cannot control, tying their fate to distant interest rates and boardrooms thousands of miles away. One unexpected policy shift in Washington, one rate hike in London, and entire economies can crumble overnight. This is not stability, it's a high-wire act performed without a safety net. Our financial system has become a grand balancing trick, one that depends entirely on the belief that debt can expand infinitely without ever demanding repayment. But debt always demands repayment, in money, in time, or in pain. It shapes behavior. It manipulates governments. It creates bubbles of false prosperity and transfers wealth quietly upward. And most dangerously of all, it binds the future to promises made in the past. Every dollar borrowed today is a silent claim on tomorrow's labor, on the hours, dreams, and productivity of generations yet to be born. And when those claims multiply beyond reason, the world finds itself trapped in a cycle that no spreadsheet can solve. That's why history is, at its core, a graveyard of debts unpaid. Kingdoms, republics, empires, all have followed the same path: accumulation, denial, collapse. The methods change, but the mathematics never do. Debt always ends in one of 3 ways: through honest repayment, through inflation that erodes its real value, or through default, the open admission that the promise can't be kept. There has never been a 4th option. Yet today, debt hides in the shadows of our daily lives. When governments run deficits, they don't ask citizens for cash. They issue bonds, sell them to investors, and quietly stack liabilities that future taxpayers will inherit. When you swipe your credit card, you aren't paying, you're borrowing from your future self. When corporations announce record profits, those profits often exist only because borrowed money was used to buy back shares, inflating value without creating anything real. Debt, in our era, has become invisible not because it disappeared but because it has been normalized. And that normalization is deadly. Leverage feels like freedom on the way up and like suffocation on the way down. It's financial gravity: the higher you climb, the harder you fall. The global system now floats on invisible promises, promises that may never be fulfilled. Look at the United States, the foundation of the current order. Its national debt crossed $34 trillion in 2024, a figure so immense it ceases to mean anything. But translate that into reality: every American taxpayer carries hundreds of thousands of dollars in obligations they never personally agreed to. Interest payments alone now compete with defense spending, meaning the world's dominant superpower is borrowing money just to pay the interest on the money it already owes. That isn't strategy, it's survival. And the pattern is global. In Europe, nations like Italy and Greece remain locked in debt ratios that surpass their entire annual economic output. China hides its own crisis beneath layers of local government obligations and shadow financing buried in state enterprises. The numbers may differ, but the disease is the same: a civilization addicted to borrowing tomorrow's wealth to fund today's comfort. The most dangerous part of this addiction isn't mathematical, it's psychological. Politicians love debt because it postpones pain. Raising taxes risks votes. Cutting spending risks riots. Borrowing, though, feels painless: an IOU written to a future generation that can't yet complain. The illusion works beautifully. Until interest rates rise. When the cost of money itself increases, the fantasy collapses. This is exactly what began in 2022, when central banks around the world hiked rates to combat inflation. Suddenly, the cost of debt multiplied. Governments faced tighter budgets and fiscal crises. Families saw mortgages balloon overnight. Corporations once confident in endless cheap credit were forced to refinance at double the cost. The beast of debt, once sleeping, had opened its eyes. And yet, even now, the world doubles down. Students are told that education is an investment, even if it means decades of repayment. Families are told to stretch for homes they can barely afford because real estate never loses value. Entire nations are reassured that deficits don't matter, that central banks can print infinite currency without consequence. This is the grand illusion of modern finance, the myth that debt is infinite, harmless, and free. History, however, screams a different story. When debt becomes unbearable, there are only a few exits. The first is inflation, the quiet theft of value. Governments debase their currencies, making every dollar worth less. When prices rise by 10%, your savings lose 10% of their power, but the government's debt simultaneously shrinks in real terms. It's elegant, silent, and devastating, a hidden tax paid not through votes or protests, but through eroded purchasing power. The second escape is restructuring, the painful but negotiated admission that debts cannot be paid. We saw it in Greece, where investors were forced to accept massive losses so the system could survive. Restructuring is financial triage, it saves the body by amputating a limb. The third and most explosive is default, the outright refusal to pay. Argentina, Russia, Venezuela, and countless others have walked this path. Each default shatters trust, freezes trade, and sparks political upheaval. None of these routes are painless, they are merely different kinds of collapse. So which path are we walking today? The signs point unmistakably toward inflation, not the runaway kind that burns cities, but the slow erosion that eats savings quietly while officials insist everything is fine. Central banks talk tough, raising rates in public, but deep down they need inflation. It's the only way debt-burdened governments can breathe. Every year of rising prices lightens their load, even as it weighs heavier on yours. And that means ordinary people, citizens, workers, savers, are paying the invisible bill. Your wages don't stretch as far. Your groceries cost more. Your savings buy less. This isn't mismanagement. It's design. It's the oldest trick in the financial playbook. Bleed the public slowly enough that they thank you for the transfusion. But the illusion can only last so long. Because debt isn't just economics, it's power. It determines who commands and who obeys, who gets rescued and who gets ruined. When the cycle breaks, the powerful rarely pay. Banks get bailed out. Corporations restructure. Politicians retire with pensions intact. Ordinary people lose homes, jobs, and hope. That is why understanding debt is no longer optional, it's survival. If you can't see the cage, you'll never realize you're trapped inside it. So what can you do? First, strip away the illusions. Recognize that every dollar borrowed carries a cost, always. Second, study the pattern. Every empire believes it's different. Every empire collapses the same way. Third, protect yourself. Don't panic, prepare. Build wealth that holds value when paper promises fail. Learn skills that governments can't inflate away. Understand value not as a number but as freedom. Because the cycle always repeats. Debt builds, leaders deny, crisis erupts, and societies reset. The question is never if, only when. The choice you have is whether to face it asleep or awake. Those who understand the game survive it. Those who don't pay for the sins of others. Global debt is not a statistic, it's the shadow looming over our collective future. It has crushed civilizations before and it can do so again. But history also shows that awareness is armor. Those who see the trap can step aside before it snaps shut.